In 1978, China was one of the poorest nations on Earth, a country where most people lived on less than $2 a day. A country isolated, underdeveloped, and broken by decades of turmoil. Today, China is a global manufacturing empire, a technological contender, a rising military power, and the biggest challenger to Western dominance in the 21st century. How did this transformation happen in just one generation? And what does it mean for the future of the world? When the People's Republic of China was born in 1949, the country was exhausted. War, hunger, and political chaos had left China with almost nothing. Factories barely existed. Most people farmed by hand. Cities were old, slow, and disconnected. Life expectancy was low, technology was absent, and trade with the outside world was almost zero. For nearly 30 years, China tried to survive through a fully controlled, centrally planned system. But the experiment failed. Production stagnated. Innovation disappeared. Famines and political campaigns destroyed lives and trust. By the late 1970s, China's economy was smaller than that of Spain or Italy. On paper, it was a giant nation. In reality, it was a poor, fragile country, with no clear economic engine. And then, in 1978, one man quietly began to rewrite China's destiny. Deng Xiaoping is the most important economic reformer of the modern age, yet many outside China barely know his name. After Mao's death, Deng stepped into power with one radical idea: China must open its doors to the world. For a nation that had been closed and suspicious of foreign influence, this was revolutionary. Private business was banned. Foreign companies were seen as enemies. The state tried to control everything and produced very little. Deng challenged this. He said, "It doesn't matter if the cat is black or white. If it catches mice, it is a good cat." Capitalism or socialism, left or right, the labels didn't matter to him. What mattered was what worked. So Deng created something entirely new, the Special Economic Zone. The first was in a tiny fishing village called Shenzhen. At that time, it was little more than farmland and huts. Deng pointed to this empty land and said, "Let's build the future here." In these zones, local officials could experiment. Foreign companies were allowed. Factories could be built. Profits could be made. Shenzhen grew from a village into one of the fastest growing cities in history. It was the prototype, proof that if China opened selectively, it could grow at unbelievable speed. Deng had discovered the blueprint, a model that could turn a closed, poor country into an economic engine. In the 1990s and 2000s, China perfected one thing better than anyone else in human history: manufacturing at scale. China didn't just build factories, it built entire industrial ecosystems. Ports that could swallow whole fleets of container ships. Highways and freight rail that stitched the country together like arteries. Entire cities focused on one thing: shoes, toys, electronics, furniture, textiles. Millions of workers were trained to deliver speed and precision. Electricity was made cheap and abundant. Local officials were rewarded for growth above everything else. No country could match this combination of speed, scale, and discipline. Then, in 2001, came the turning point. China joined the World Trade Organization. Overnight, China could trade with almost every country on Earth on favorable terms. Western brands rushed in: Nike, Apple, Samsung, HP, Dell, Adidas. They all moved production to China. It was cheaper, but not just cheaper. It was faster, more consistent, and more scalable than any alternative. By 2010, roughly 1 out of every 4 manufactured goods on the planet came from China. And with this manufacturing explosion came a human miracle. Around 700 million people were lifted out of poverty, the largest poverty reduction ever recorded in history. But this miracle had a price. Opening markets caused pain. Old state factories closed, millions lost secure jobs, inequality grew. Rural communities watched cities surge ahead. To keep growth alive, China pushed harder. Massive credit, aggressive construction, and real estate booms. When the West crashed during the 2008 financial crisis, China responded with a huge stimulus, pumping hundreds of billions of dollars into railways, highways, airports, and housing. It kept China growing, but it also planted the seeds of today's debt and property problems. And all this industrialization left scars: polluted air, poisoned rivers, and a heavy environmental bill that the next generation would have to pay. As the factories roared, something new awakened inside China: the Chinese consumer. Hundreds of millions of people moved from villages into cities. Incomes rose. A middle class emerged, with dreams, savings, and smartphones. China built the world's largest high-speed rail network, tens of thousands of kilometers, connecting cities at lightning speed. For decades, the world sold goods to China. But now, China began selling to itself and innovating for itself. A new generation of companies rose. Alibaba built the biggest online shopping ecosystem in the world. Tencent created WeChat, an app that became a wallet, a bank, a messenger, a social platform, a mini-internet. Huawei pushed China into the front row of global telecom and 5G. BYD and other EV makers began challenging Tesla in the electric car race. China was no longer just copying foreign technology. It was producing patents, research, and future tech at scale. The world's factory was turning into a tech and consumer superpower. When we say empire, we don't mean armies marching and land being conquered. China built a different kind of empire, an economic empire. In 2013, China launched the Belt and Road Initiative, the most ambitious infrastructure project in human history. The goal was simple but powerful: connect the world to China through roads, railways, ports, power plants, and digital networks. China financed and built highways across Central Asia, ports in Africa and the Indian Ocean, rail networks in Europe, power plants and dams in South Asia, telecom networks in Latin America. More than 150 countries signed up. Chinese companies didn't just sell goods, they built the roads on which those goods travel, the ports where they arrive, and sometimes even the digital platforms where payments are made. Every road, port, and power plant came with contracts, loans, and long-term commitments. By the mid-2020s, China's total investment stock abroad reached into the trillions of dollars, with billions flowing every year into infrastructure, energy, mining, and technology in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Nowhere is this more visible than in Africa. China has been Africa's largest trading partner for years. It buys oil, gas, copper, cobalt, lithium, the minerals that power electric cars, batteries, and high-tech devices. In return, it builds highways, ports, bridges, and stadiums. To some, this is partnership and opportunity. To others, it looks like debt and dependency. Critics say some countries are now so indebted to China, their politics and policies are quietly shaped from Beijing. But whether admired or feared, China's global footprint is undeniable. It has used money, infrastructure and trade, not tanks, to build an empire stretching from the Pacific to the Atlantic, from Asia to Africa, from the Arctic to Antarctica. China's rise came with a heavy environmental cost. For years, cities choked under toxic smog. Rivers turned black. Soil became contaminated. Water shortages started to threaten entire regions. This crisis forced Beijing to change direction. Today, China is both the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide and the world's largest investor in green energy. It dominates solar panel production, wind turbine manufacturing, battery technology, electric vehicle factories, huge solar farms spread across deserts, wind parks stretch across mountains and coasts. Chinese EVs roll onto streets in Europe, Latin America, and Asia. On the global stage, China presents itself as a leader in climate efforts, promising carbon neutrality in the coming decades and offering green tech to developing countries. But there is a contradiction. The same China that builds solar farms abroad also funds coal plants and heavy industry in some of those same nations. The same system that lifts millions from poverty also sometimes traps them in polluted, water-stressed environments. China stands at the center of the world's climate fight, as both a major part of the problem and a necessary part of the solution. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the world split into camps. The West imposed sanctions and sent weapons to Kyiv. Russia looked for new economic and political partners. China chose a careful path. Officially, Beijing calls for peace, dialogue, and respect for sovereignty. It avoids calling the conflict an invasion. It opposes Western sanctions, but stops short of direct military support. In reality, the war has created opportunities for China: cheaper Russian energy, discounted oil and gas, shifts in global supply chains that push some countries closer to Chinese markets. China presents itself as neutral, but many in the West see it as leaning towards Moscow, helping to cushion Russia from complete isolation. For Beijing, the war is also a warning. If conflict ever erupts over Taiwan or the South China Sea, it has now seen how the West responds, how sanctions are used, and how alternative economic networks might be built. No story of China's rise is complete without its neighbor, India. Economically, the two are deeply connected. China is one of India's largest trading partners. India imports Chinese smartphones, telecom equipment, solar panels, and industrial components. Yet the relationship is full of tension. Along their long Himalayan border, standoffs and clashes, including deadly skirmishes in 2020, have left deep wounds. India sees China as a strategic rival that supports Pakistan, builds ports around the Indian Ocean, and expands influence in South Asia and Africa. China sees India as the only other Asian giant that could one day balance its influence, especially in the Indo-Pacific. India moves closer to the United States, Japan, and Australia through the Quad, while China strengthens its ties with Pakistan, Russia, and parts of the global South. They trade with each other, yet they also quietly prepare for the possibility of conflict. For China's superpower blueprint, India is both a market and a rival, a neighbor it cannot ignore, and a competitor it cannot fully control. If the 20th century was defined by the United States and the Soviet Union, the 21st century is defined by the United States and China. Their rivalry stretches across trade and tariffs, technology and AI, semiconductors and chips, military power and alliances, influence in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and cyberspace. The US accuses China of unfair trade practices, intellectual property theft, and using state power to dominate global markets. China accuses the US of trying to contain its rise, interfering in its internal affairs, and surrounding it with alliances and military bases. The battle for technology is fierce. Washington restricts China's access to cutting-edge chips and tools. Beijing responds by pouring money into domestic AI, semiconductor research, and open-source models. At the same time, the two economies remain deeply entangled. American brands manufacture in China. Chinese products fill American homes. Financial flows and supply chains tie them together. It is a rivalry built on dependence, two giants locked in competition, but unable to fully separate. China's ambitions don't stop at factories and finance. In space, China has built its own space station, Tiangong. It has sent probes to the Moon and Mars and plans future lunar missions and bases. In the polar regions, China built multiple research stations in Antarctica, collecting climate data, projecting scientific power, and positioning itself for a future where polar resources and routes could become strategic. Deep underground, another form of power lies: rare earths and critical minerals. China controls much of the mining and refining of rare earth elements, the materials needed for electric cars, wind turbines, fighter jets, missiles, smartphones, and AI data centers. If chips are the brain of modern technology, these minerals are the bones. And then there is the military. China has transformed its armed forces. Its navy is now one of the largest on Earth by number of ships. It has modern air power, long-range missiles, and expanding cyber and space capabilities. Officially, China says it does not seek conflict, only defense and deterrence. But as it builds a global economic empire, it is also building the means to protect that empire. From the outside, China can look unstoppable. Yet beneath the surface of this momentum, a different rhythm is playing, one that few pay attention to. First, demographics. China is aging rapidly. The population is starting to shrink. There will be fewer workers and more retirees to support. Second, debt and real estate. For years, growth depended on building. More apartments, more towers, more cities. Now, many stand half empty. Developers are struggling. Local governments that relied on land sales are under pressure. Third, the middle income trap. Wages have risen. But pushing from factory power to innovation superpower is difficult. Growth is slowing, even as expectations rise. Fourth, tech choke points. China still depends on foreign tools and advanced equipment for the newest chips. Export controls and sanctions try to slow its tech rise. Beijing fights back with massive investments, but catching up fully will take time. Fifth, strategic vulnerabilities. Most of China's imported oil flows through narrow sea lanes like the Strait of Malacca, a potential choke point in any crisis. And finally, environment and legitimacy. Pollution, water stress, inequality, these create long-term internal pressure. The political system must keep delivering stability and growth to maintain its authority in the eyes of its people. China is powerful, but it is not invincible. So, what comes next? There are several possible futures. In one, China overtakes the United States and becomes the world's largest economy, a superpower shaping trade, technology, and politics. In another, China slows down, still powerful, still central to manufacturing, but struggling with aging, debt, and internal challenges. In a third future, the world doesn't have one center of power at all, but two overlapping systems, a US-centric world and a China-centric world. Trading, competing, clashing, cooperating, all at the same time. What is certain is this: China's rise was not an accident. It was strategy. It was discipline. It was a blueprint. A blueprint that took a poor, wounded nation and turned it into a global force that the world can no longer ignore. People may admire China. People may fear it. People may criticize it. But no one can pretend it doesn't matter. Because the story of China's rise is the story of how the old world began to crack and how a new world quietly stepped into its place. Thank you for watching. If this inspired you, hit subscribe, like, comment, and share. Be part of our journey. Beyond identities, beyond borders, beyond divisions, our destiny is one. You are watching Next Horizon Global.